It's a wild new world in terms of computing, possibly a renaissance for the small artists like you and me. So yeah, power to the people.
Stuck with the Bun.
Hello, I'm the Bun. Welcome to the channel. This here is Stuck with the Bun. This is a show all about things that you're stuck on, that I'm stuck on, things that I've been stuck on, and hopefully we will get unstuck. Today, what are we stuck on? We are stuck on this whole M1 business, this Apple M1 business. Is it any good for solo music creators? You know, people like me, people like you, who sit at the desk with a guitar and record your own jams. There is a lot of hype surrounding these machines because they are inexpensive, they're very cost effective, and they're very powerful. There is a lot of concern about compatibility issues, both with software and hardware. These machines are a completely new architecture, a completely new idea. Does the stuff that I used to make still work with the stuff that I'm going to make? Can I use old sessions on future iterations of this? Does my hardware hook up to it and run? Does the software that I rely on work? A little later on, we're also going to talk to my pal Nick Hill. Nick is a solo music creator, producer, video guy as well. He has a YouTube channel. If you don't know Nick Hill, check it out. The links are going to be down below in the description. Nick has a base model MacBook Air, you know, the smallest of the whole bunch. And Nick's going to share with us his findings in terms of what works, what the shortcomings of that system may or may not be. Just want to take a second to thank everybody with me at Patreon and YouTube memberships. These are the people who brought you this episode. They're the people who kind of really make everything happen around here. So thank you to all the patrons and YouTube members. If you'd like to become either of those things, you can find the links down below. This model is the M1 Mac Mini from Apple Computers, of course, and it has 8 cores and 16 gigabytes of RAM. I went with the small hard drive, the 256 gigabyte hard drive. It is an SSD hard drive. It is a very fast hard drive. So those are the specs of the machine itself. But I went with this one because it has the most connections, the most ports. There are almost enough connections right off the hop to hook up all the stuff I need to hook up. I got a dongle to add a few additional connections. I'm going to have to get a little bit more to bring the SD card reader up to the front and stuff like that, just for ease of access. Right now I'm reaching behind the computer. Software, what's going on with software? It is somewhat of a concern because the new operating system, the new Mac OS, is written for these chips. What Apple has done to remedy this whole software compatibility thing is they've introduced this thing called Rosetta. In fact, Rosetta 2. So essentially you have your operating system, and within the operating system there is this emulator that emulates the x86 architecture, the Intel architecture. And it allows applications that traditionally ran on Intel to run in this emulation. And strangely enough, most of those applications run faster in this emulation layer than they did on Intel machines. Definitely a plus, not complaining about that at all. The sidebar in it is some things just don't run. What software is compatible, at least the stuff that I'm using Reaper 6 and TuneTrack stuff. So TuneTrack Easy Drummer and Superior Drummer, no problem. I'm using the Slate All Access Pass, the mix and master bundle, if you will. Amp Sims, I'm using the Neural DSP NTS and the Brainworks Ampeg SVT3. And all of those things are working no problem. Stuff that is not working is STL Amp Hub or Tone Hub. Can't get those to run at all. They just crash, and they crash the entire DAW. And I've talked to someone at STL and they're like, yeah, it's gonna be a bit before we figure that out. That said, STL regular plugins seem to work, according to some friends. My pal Artie uses some of the STL regular plugins, and those are working. Additionally, with the Neural DSP, I cannot seem to get the parallax to load. And I think it's just something with the installer for this machine. Not too sure. I may put in a ticket to see what's going on. From what I understand, with the architecture, especially with a DAW. So a DAW is an interesting thing because you load plugins into the DAW. And so the DAW runs, in this case, I'm using the Intel distribution of Reaper because I want to run Intel distributions of plugins. So it is recommended by Reaper, by Cocos, that you run Intel everything. Try and keep it all the same. So yeah, if the DAW that you want to use is an Intel-based DAW, it's a good idea to use Intel-based plugins. Not all plugins are gonna work, but most of them seem to. Conversely, if your DAW is an M1 specific DAW, then try to use only M1 plugins. It's gonna be a little while before there is M1 written software for everything. Hardware. I use a really old interface, a USB 2.0 interface, 2-channel PreSonus audio box VSL 22 or 22 VSL. The HX Stomp, you can use that as an interface. Any of the HELIX stuff, that all seems to work as an interface. A lot of interfaces are working. It just depends whether or not it needs a proprietary console and how that console needs to access resources. If it's simpler, it seems to just work. If it needs a console and some proprietary kind of stuff, that seems to be where the problems start popping up. Seemingly, the overall latency is lower in terms of like the playthrough latency, playing a guitar at the desk. It seems that the latency is lower there, as well as the latency is lower in terms of plugins and all that stuff going on in the DAW in a mix. Everything is faster. I can work on much bigger projects in real time. Like I can track with a very low latency setting, also mix, and the machine just crushes through. How far you can push it, I'm not exactly sure, but I know that I can work in terms of a fluid workflow without having to change anything that I typically would have had to change in the past. Concerns. A lot of people have brought up the fact that it is a 2-prong plug. They're like, it's not grounded. What about audio noise? What about, AC noise? Well, something else that it doesn't have is a power brick. It does not have a power brick. It does not have a power supply in the traditional sense. There may be something going on inside, but there's very little in that box. It runs very, very cold. There's very little of anything anywhere, which is a huge deal for me because I live in this really old house. The electricity isn't very clean, and I battled with AC noise, even with grounded plugs. The place where I really notice it is the Jazzmaster. Even though I have a humbucker in the Jazzmaster, something is up with the grounding in that guitar, and traditionally it was not a guitar I could use for very many things. But now the AC noise is lower and I can use it for more stuff. Let's hop on over to Nick Hill's place and see how things are going for him.
Behind me is a 2020 MacBook Air M1. It's the base model. It has 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD. I'm here to share my experiences so far when using this for music production. A little bit about the setup. The MacBook Air only has it's Thunderbolt 4, but it's USB-C. It's confusing, the nomenclature, everything's intertwined. There's 2 ports. I'm running a CalDigit T3 Plus into one of the ports, which first and foremost supplies power, but I'm also able to run a 27-inch 1080p monitor at 60 Hertz, and I am running my audio interface, which currently I am using the Line 6 HX Stomp. With this setup, even running the Stomp through the hub, I have not had any issues or any problems at all. It's working flawlessly. So I am using the HX Stomp as my main audio interface, which is nice because obviously I can track guitars right through the Stomp, latency free, not an issue, we're good to go. Now, I'm a Studio One user primarily, and I've been using Studio One 5 on this MacBook Air without any issue. Studio One is not optimized to run on the M1 platform, the ARM-based architecture, and that's the case with a lot of software so far. But every day that goes by, more and more things are being updated and optimized to run on this M1 architecture. Studio One just isn't there, but that's okay because it's running flawlessly inside of some emulation called Rosetta. Again, go do some research. I'm not gonna explain that here. I'm composing and tracking guitars for a complete song on this setup just to kind of prove the concept that it can be done, and that even when things are being emulated or not completely optimized for this platform, it's still an amazing piece of hardware and you can get things done. Now, so far inside of Studio One, for my drums, I've been using Perfect Drums just because of the particular project I happen to be working on. That's the VST, that's the drum program I've been using. So I installed it on this machine without any issue. It's working fine. I've run into maybe 1 or 2 hiccups where the graphical user interface, while it was up a couple times, I was getting a little bit of lagging, but I haven't been able to duplicate that, and I think it only happened twice. And as soon as I closed the plugin and opened it back up, everything was fine, everything was smooth. I also have the Slate Everything bundle, and I am using most of those Slate plugins, almost all of them, inside of Studio One, which is being emulated without issue. I found that a little curious because I have seen some videos where people were able to run Slate plugins inside of Logic, which is an Apple-based piece of software, so it's optimized. But inside of a different DAW, especially one that's being emulated in Rosetta, they were running into issues. I haven't had that issue. There were 2 plugins that were blacklisted right away by Studio One that just haven't been able to work, and that's fine. It's been the Elosis Air EQ and the De-esser, both by Elosis. Other than that, I've used Virtual Mix Rack, no problem. I've used Virtual Tape Machine without issue. I've been using the FG Gray compressor on my master bus like I usually do without issue. So like I've said, so far, I have not had any problems running Slate plugins inside of Studio One. I've also been using FabFilter plugins. I use FabFilter plugins down on my machine, my main recording machine downstairs, my PC. FabFilter has already optimized all their plugins to work on the M1 platform. So there is that. These plugins, while they might be optimized for M1, they're running inside of an emulated piece of software, which is Studio One. With that being said, no issues, flawlessly. Using Pro EQ without problem. Pro L, the limiter, no problem. Multi-band compression, FabFilter, no problem. Everything's been great. I have not run into any issues. Now, I completely recognize this is not very in-depth. I haven't given you very many examples. I haven't tried to crash this thing or break this thing or just to see how much I can do to break it. What I've been doing is recording on it, and you can see I have tracks recorded, I recorded guitars, recording bass, programming drums, I'm doing some mixing. I haven't had any issues, and that's what I think is important. You can use this new architecture. You're going to be able to do what you need to do. To summarize, so far, so good. No major issues, everything's running fine, even if it's emulated, and it's been quite a joy and a pleasure to work on this thing. So I hope this was helpful, and let's throw it back to Bun.
Thanks to Nick Hill for sharing his findings in all of this. Check out Nick's channel. The link is down below in the description. Thoughts so far? It's been about a month working with this machine, and I've been using it for music production and video editing. I'm editing this video on this machine, and so far I've done some pre-edits and things are looking good. Things are working really well. I use DaVinci Resolve. As far as music production goes, nothing has crashed so far in terms of the stuff that I was able to load and start using. Not having any problems with that, no crashes, no issues. Everything is just working flawlessly and faster than normal. So it has been a very nice change because, yeah, there were some issues with my last workflow. Thanks again to everybody with me at Patreon and YouTube memberships. If you'd like to get involved and help things along around here, that is a great place to do it. It makes things go a lot further. So thank you to everyone with me there. Thank you to everyone who has ever been with me there. If Patreon or YouTube memberships is not your thing, there is music downloads and streams. There is merch. There is creative assets. There's a bunch of different ways that you can help. And if you're interested in helping, all the links are down below. Thank you very much to everyone who has helped thus far. It's a wild new world in terms of computing, possibly a renaissance for the small artists like you and me. So Yeah, power to the people. If you are reserved in getting into this M1 stuff, if you are already into it and love it, I'd love to hear about it down below in the comments, and other people would like to hear about it as well. You know, people are very iffy getting into the system. I was kind of forced into it, and I'm glad that it worked out, but I'm curious to hear other people's experiences with it. So yeah, I hope you're well. Hope you like this video, and I hope to see you in the next video.